The most well-known vault in radio history was constructed by Jack Benny in 1945. All of the sound effects and remarks about being stingy were fictitious. However, Jack also had an actual vault. After his passing, one remained sealed for 50 years. There were audio reels with the label "Do Not Open" inside. Researchers heard Jack's voice confessing things that may have ruined his career when they eventually played them. The tapes show the real reason behind his departure from vaudeville, as well as what actually transpired during those years of missing battle. Although his mother had already made that decision months before, he was born Benjamin Kubilski on February 14, 1894. Despite being pregnant in Waukegan, Emma Sachs made the long journey to Chicago in order to give birth there. She thought her son's future as a world-class violinist would benefit from a birth certificate from a big city. She wished to avoid having a baby boy from a small town. She desired that he be a significant figure. Her body was weak, but her mind was sharp, and she had already made the decision that her son would play violin in front of crowded concert halls as he grew up. Meyer, his father, told a different tale. He was born in Poland, began selling items on the streets of Chicago, and gradually rose to the position of saloon owner. He considered show business to be a bad fit for any decent Jewish family, and didn't think much of it. In that marriage, however, Emma's voice was louder. She began molding Benjamin as soon as he was able to grasp an instrument. They had returned to Woking and lived in a small home on South G Street. By the time he was 3, the fact that Benjamin could see Lake Michigan from their front window became problematic. He was meant to spend 2 hours a day practicing his violin, but instead, he kept his eyes on the lake. Emma continued to promote the music, while Meyer continued to run his tavern, and finally opened a haberdashery. Benjamin continued to play the violin, but he became a protective big brother after Florence was born in 1900. He received a half-size violin as a gift on his 6th birthday that year, and he started taking lessons with Professor Harlow right once. He charged 50 cents twice a week. Benjamin did well. So good that he was dubbed a prodigy. He was frequently brought to Chicago to attend the musical college and learn under Hugo Kortschak. He detested practicing though. As he hardly moved his bow, his mother sat at the piano and accompanied him, repeatedly insisting, "You can do it better." Because of their strong belief in him, the residents of Waukegan gathered funds to send him to study in Europe. To everyone's surprise, he declined the offer. He was already straying off that course. He was failing all his classes. He played tricks. He did not attend class. The most well-known incident occurred in the winter, when he covered the classroom radiator with Limburg cheese. The entire school had to close when it melted. The principal informed him he might return if he changed after being expelled during his freshman year, but he never did. By that time, Benjamin had secured a position as a violinist in the Barrison Theater's pit orchestra. He was performing live while his classmates studied arithmetic. His father's saloon provided the true schooling. It was crowded with loud personalities and touring entertainers. He discovered what made people laugh and what didn't there. The Marx Brothers arrived in town one evening in 1911, and Minnie, their mother, watched young Benjamin play. His parents turned down her offer to take him on a tour for $7.50 a week, bed and board included. It would corrupt him, they said. His life might have been different, but they slammed the door. Benjamin, being 17 years old, made a significant choice the same year. He permanently left school and joined 43-year-old widow Cora Salisbury in a vaudeville show. She assured his parents that she would protect him from negative influences and stage door girls. They performed 4 gigs a day in dusty theaters around the Midwest while traveling non-stop. Benjamin made $7.50 a week, and their act was referred to as ragtime instead than grand opera. Although it wasn't much, it was the start. Then all almost fell apart in 1912. Due of their similar names, renowned musician Jan Kubelik threatened to sue him. Benjamin changed his stage name to Ben K. Benny out of fear. However, that did not resolve the issue. He was followed a few years later by Ben Burney, another performer. The moniker Jack Benny resulted from this, derived in part from sailors referring to one another as Jack, and in part from a fortuitous luncheon with comic Benny Rubin. The name stuck by 1921. Jack joined pianist Lyman Woods after Ka quit the act in 1914 to take care of her mother. By 1916, their act was making between $350 and $400 a week, which was a substantial sum at the time. From Boston to San Francisco, they performed in elegant theaters, fusing humorous timing and funny faces with somber music. However, When they performed at the Palace Theater in New York in 1917, everything collapsed. They exploded on the largest vaudeville stage. The audience didn't care that their act was an animal routine. Jack joined the Navy once the partnership dissolved. During World War I, Jack was drafted at the age of 23 and sent to the Great Lakes Naval Training Center. At first, he played the violin for festivals and ceremonies. Then one night, everything changed. When he performed the Rosary during a talent show, the audience began to jeer. Pat O'Brien, a fellow sailor, yelled at him to crack a joke. After Jack's brief comment, everyone in the room burst out laughing. That was the time. The comedian was born during that time. He started doing frequent appearances in the Great Lakes Review, where he portrayed the awkward character Izzy. Up to 5,000 sailors attended his performances. He learned the art of timing. He found charm. Additionally, he found that a single joke garnered more applause than an hour of music. He retained that persona when the war ended in 1918. America was still on food restrictions, exhausted and broke. Thus, Jack Benny adopted the frugal, penny-pinching demeanor he had cultivated while serving in the Navy. He founded Fiddle Phonology, a solo performance that combined jokes about being cheap with violin playing. He ridiculed himself. He took counterfeit currency from his coat. The audiences adored it. There was no better time to do it. People could relate to it, therefore they laughed. He was not making fun of them. Among them was him. He made much more money when he went back to the VA circuit with Lyman Woods. They reimagined their performance, scheduling second build slots across the nation, and fusing music and humor. They performed in big cities and prestigious theaters in Chicago. However, the crucial occasion, the Palace in New York, had already gone, and he was still troubled by that setback. Jack persisted in pushing. He cut the violin shorter, he made the jokes sharper, and he gradually transformed into something new, with a name that was ultimately his. He was a man who could stand in front of thousands of people, barely move his face, speak one phrase, and leave everyone speechless, not a side act or a failed musician. Jack Benny was 30 years old, and had been touring for more than 10 years, when he finally made it to Broadway in 1924. The stage was nothing new to him, but this time, it was different. Benny's antics were more than just a vaudeville routine. It was his opportunity to try something fresh at last. With his violin in hand, he stood beneath the brilliant lights. However, he had no intention of impressing anyone with his skill this time. Even though he had begun playing at the age of 6 and could genuinely perform well, he purposefully played just enough poorly to make others laugh. Broadway had never seen that combination of caustic sarcasm, a little song, and a whole deal of confidence before. It was described as fresh by the New York Times, and he had finally decided on Jack Benny after years of alternating between names like Benjamin Kubilski and Ben K. Benny. It worked and it stuck. He took a chance in a show called The Great Temptations 2 years later, in 1926. It was audacious, daring, and somewhat scandalous. Once more, he performed as a witty violinist, but this time he began improvising. 5-minute sketches ended up lasting 15 minutes. People adored it. The producers didn't. Benny didn't care that they pleaded with him to follow the script and keep the show on schedule. He made use of the creative control granted to him under his contract. The corporation threatened to replace him because of the intense backstage arguments. He didn't stop, though. He was unable to. Perhaps Broadway began to recognize that Jack Benny was different at that point. He wasn't merely acting. He was changing the regulations. Something unexpected occurred in that same year. Sadie Marks and Jack met. In a technical sense, they had already met. When Jack was roughly 30 years old in 1919 or 1920, Zippo Marks asked him to a family Passover dinner in Vancouver. There was a 14-year-old girl named Sadie who was utterly starstruck. In an attempt to impress him, she performed a violin piece for him. He didn't even linger to hear. He begged Zippo to assist him in leaving covertly. He was heard by her. When he performed at the Orium Theater the following evening, she and her companion sat in the first row and looked straight ahead. Not a laugh, not a grin. She exacted her retribution. They didn't cross paths again until 1925 or 1926, when she was 20 years old and employed as a lingerie salesperson at the May firm in downtown Los Angeles. She broke the business record when Jack walked in and bought so much women's hosiery. He returned daily. When he was on tour, he called her all the time. This was not a brief affair. Even though it was sluggish, clunky, and strange, it managed to function. Jack Benny landed a major part in Artists and Models in 1927. His Broadway career peaked at this point. He was 30 years old and had been touring for more than 10 years. When he performed at the Palace in New York in 1917, everything collapsed. They exploded on the largest vaudeville stage. The audience didn't care that their act was an animal routine. He was a man who could stand in front of thousands of people, barely move his face, speak one phrase, and leave everyone speechless, not a side act or a failed musician. He was a man who could stand in front of thousands of people, barely move his face, speak one phrase, and leave everyone speechless, not a side act or a failed musician. He was a man who could stand in front of thousands of people, barely move his face, speak one phrase, and leave everyone speechless, not a side act or a failed musician. He was a man who could stand in front of thousands of people, barely move his face, speak one phrase, and leave everyone speechless, not a side act or a failed musician. He His weekly salary was $1,500, or roughly $25,000. There was more to it than just money. It served as confirmation. Something he was doing clicked. He would enter the stage, set up a lovely classical piece, and then purposefully ruin it with terrible violin playing. The crowd let up a yell. He employed well-timed sarcasm, lengthy pauses, and a facade of anger. Even though the more intelligent members of the audience were aware of his true abilities, he would prefer to be laughed at than praised. He created art out of his own failure. It was also functioning. Jack was making people laugh that same year, but he also had an incident that almost ended his career. He was accused of underpaying orchestra musicians by a theater manager. All of a sudden, the rumors had nothing to do with talent or comedy. They have to do with money. The musicians' union became engaged. Blacklisting was a threat. His shows were cashed by theater owners. It wasn't good. In order to continue working, Jack had to repent and pay compensation. However, the harm persisted. Rumors began to circulate that Jack Benny was frugal and had stiff musicians in order to save money. And no one forgot when he embraced the cheapskate persona on radio years later. It was more than an act. It had its roots in actual controversy. However, that year wasn't entirely a catastrophe. Jack married Sadie, who is now Mary Livingstone, at the Clayton Hotel in Waukegan, Illinois on January 14, 1927. When it was time for Jack to stomp the glass during the ceremony, an unforeseen circumstance occurred. Jack was not the one who passed out. Mary was the one. In front of everyone, she fell to the ground. However, she discovered roses when she awoke. She had already received a single red rose each day from Jack. She thought they would cease after the wedding. They didn't. Until his death in 1974, he continued to send her a single red rose each day. 48 years old. One rose each day. They adopted Joan, a 2-week-old child, in 1934. "How can you want to adopt a funny-looking thing like that one?" Jack asked after glancing at her, but they took her home. Mary had persuaded Jack to pursue a career in radio by that point. Vaudeville was in decline. It was difficult to tour. Stability was what radio meant. She was also correct. They became wealthy. Joan married at the age of 19, and the wedding cost $25,000. Her dress was made in France. Holland was the source of the flowers. The Beverly Hills Hotel served as the venue for the celebration. Hollywood had never witnessed a wedding this extravagant. In 1932, Jack made his radio debut with the Canada Dry program. By the end of the week, 40 million people had listened to it since its May 20 premiere. At first, though, it didn't click. Jack was still attempting to combine jokes with music. With the intention of impressing the audience, he played his violin with seriousness. It didn't. The ratings weren't good. No one gave a damn. Then it clicked. He gave up attempting to make an impression. He intentionally ruined the violin. He allowed others to make fun of him. He turned himself into the joke. The audience adored it all of a sudden. He relocated to CBS in 1933. Instead of growing older, he simply froze the age of 39. He was 39 all the time after that. "There's nothing funny about turning 40, he added. He unveiled the absurd underground stronghold, known as the Vault Gag that year, complete with security alarms, booby traps, and a guard who had been imprisoned there since the Civil War. It was ridiculous. It was popular and theatrical. Individuals took that vault for granted. The cast was taking shape by 1936. Don Wilson entered with a loud voice. With just a phrase or two, Phil Harris stole the show when he called Jack Jackson and displayed his Southern charm. Then came Rochester's Eddie Anderson. He was the first black man to appear on national radio on a regular basis. On the episode, he did more than just serve Jack. He outwitted him. The final word went to him. Every time he spoke, he knocked down barriers. Additionally, Jack refused to perform without Rochester when Southern stations attempted to block shows that featured him. Jack Benny dominated radio from 1937 to 1945. His show consistently ranked among the top 3. He signed a $25,000 per week contract in 1944. In today's currency, that is more than $400,000. He made almost $3 million annually. However, the man who made fun of being frugal wasn't always that way. He donated 10% of his radio revenues to war bonds during World War. The second he performed for more than 3 million troops, while traveling 32,000 meters with the USO. He took more than just the vault on tour. He made folks laugh when they needed it most. On January 7, 1945, the vault was formally introduced. Doors creaked and the alarm sounded. The guard, Ed, was waiting. There was nothing but sound as the entire event unfolded in people's imaginations. It went beyond a jest. It served as a symbol. Ronald Colman made an appearance on the show in 1946. Leo DeRoser did the same. The vault was converted into a clubhouse for the wealthy and well-known. Fans wrote messages pleading with Jack to unlock the vault for charity, despite the fact that it was a work of fiction. Because it was a component of something greater, they had faith in it. It has to do with safety. It had to do with saving. It was about laughing your way through difficult situations. Jack had made the vault a Christmas custom by 1948. In one of the most watched holiday specials ever, he gave Don Wilson a gift on December 19th, but later had second thoughts and took it back, while keeping the actual math hidden in the vault. The familiarity made the bit work. It made being frugal humorous rather than cruel. And even after the war, when Americans began spending more money, they continued to watch Jack Benny pinch pennies. The IRS wasn't laughing in real life. Despite earning $375,000 annually, Jack only reported spending $19 in amusement. He forced Jimmy and Gloria Stewart to pay for his supper in one episode, then claimed the expense of dry cleaning his suit after she spilt salad on him. However, he put the audits on the air rather than avoiding them. He included them in the joke. Jack Benny believed he had finally succeeded in 1929. He had been cast by MGM in the 1929 Hollywood Review, a 2-hour musical that included nearly all of the studio's stars. In addition to making $1 million in profit, the movie received a Best Picture nomination. Benny's performance, however, was clumsy, wooden, and rigid. He played the violin in an artificial manner. His timing was off. After his agent lobbied for it, MGM recently signed him to a 5-year deal. However, they quietly dropped him after Chasing Rainbows. His next movie failed. He returned to Broadway in a few months, humiliated. That first movie part wasn't a complete failure. It influenced how he was perceived. He began to be perceived by the studios as uneasy, uncertain, and challenging to cast. He was plagued by that one slip-up in 1929 for years. Broadway Melody of 1936, a high-profile movie that required $1 million to produce, gave him another chance in 1935. As a rival Broadway producer, Benny began improvising lines that enhanced the script. Roy Del Ruth, his director, however, detested it. He wanted Benny to follow the script exactly. They quarreled so frequently that crew members recalled hours of yelling fights. Benny believed that timing must come naturally. Del Ruth believed he was simply being challenging. Despite this, the movie made almost $2. Benny left with a reputation as someone filmmakers didn't want to deal with, despite earning $9 million and receiving a Best Picture nomination. That label adhered nearly as well as the one from his debut movie. Then 1937 arrived. While on vacation in Canada with Mary Livingstone, Jack encountered Albert Chapo, a man claiming to be an ambassador from Nicaragua. Using his diplomatic immunity, he volunteered to smuggle $31 worth of jewels for Mary through customs. Benny had faith in him. He was unaware that the man was a con artist who had already served time in Leavenworth, and that his true identity was Nathan Shapiro. The fraud fell apart on August 30th, when Benny returned to New York. The jewelry was concealed on Chapo's person. Rosa Weber, his maid, reported him when he made anti-Nazi comments. In 1939, Jack was in front of Judge Vincent L. Leal and was given a $10,000 fine, along with a 1-year prison sentence that was suspended. Benny could hardly say, "I do," when the judge said, "You must feel very much ashamed of yourself." George Burns also became entangled in it. In order to cover up his wife Gracie's arm burn scars from childhood, he purchased a $4.85 diamond bracelet for her from Chapo. Burns received a $8,000 fine. His total increased to $17,770 due to legal expenditures. Both guys had the opportunity to watch their careers fail, but instead they made it funny. On their radio appearances, they made fun of their costly errors and criminal histories. Burns even made a joke about being required to appear before a probation officer. The general populace adored it. They weren't dropped by sponsors. Their popularity actually skyrocketed. The government gave $6.14 to Roseburg, the maid who revealed the swindle. Jack never gave up on making movies. He played the lead in the 1945 fantasy film, The Horn Blows at Midnight, which told the story of an angel who was given the order to destroy Earth. Despite Warner Brothers' $1.8 million investment, the timing was disastrous. President Franklin D. Roosevelt passed away 8 days prior to the movie's premiere. The country was in grief. The last thing anyone wanted was a comedy about the end of the world. The movie lost $861,000 and only made $970,000. It was deemed unnecessary and overdone by critics. Jack, however, did not flee the catastrophe. For the next 20 years, he made it a regular joke on his shows. Because of his self-deprecating humor, the movie failed and became more well-known than it may have been. Benny finally gave television a try in 1950. Only 4 shows were scheduled for the inaugural season, when he made his CBS debut on October 28. He was unsure of how he would seem on television at 56, and still had his radio contract. In his first monologue, he even made a joke about ending his own life if the program didn't succeed. However, it was successful. It blew up. 20 million people watched every week by 1952. Millions were spent on sponsorship by Lucky Strike. By 1960, Benny was one of the most well-known figures in television, and the show was shown once a week. He experimented with that platform. Ronald Reagan, the future president, made an appearance in a vault sketch in 1954. Including guests in a running plot was uncommon in those days, but Benny did it. Young comedians were also welcomed by him. When Johnny Carson first appeared on November 20, 1955, Benny told him, "Keep improving. It won't be long before you'll have your picture on TV." Guide. Carson never forgot this advice. He took on Benny's comedy, timing, and facial gestures. He went on to become the world's longest-running late-night host, years later. Even into the 1960s, Jack Benny continued to perform. The vault sketches were subsequently developed and transformed into Cold War satire during his final season on NBC, which ran from 1964 to 1965. There were alligator mows, flamethrowers, and even guard plants called Irving in the vault. Commentary on America's fixation with security was woven throughout these jokes. Carson continued to visit the set. As Benny imparted all the skills he had acquired, their relationship grew closer. The Smother Brothers' refusal to adopt his technique at the show's conclusion on April 16, 1965, caused a great deal of stress on air. NBC paid a premium to cover the end of something significant because they knew it was happening. Even when he retired, Benny remained. He spoke to the Times during his guest appearances. He hosted a program featuring Bob Hope and the Beach Boys in 1965. During the Vietnam War, he discussed thrift using his vault gags. He was paid big cash by CBS for one-night shows. He was among the most paid comedians in America, even in his 70s. But there was something he never discussed that lay underlying all the jokes. He advertised Lucky Strike cigarettes from 1950 to 1964. He marketed the product that would kill him for 15 years. He canceled a show in October 1974 due to vertigo. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in December. It couldn't be operated. He had just a few weeks. He continued filming until the very end. Jack Benny passed away on December 26, 1974, at the age of 80. Johnny Carson, Bob Hope, Frank Sinatra, and George Burns were among his last guests. Then an unforeseen event occurred. His $5,052,000 fortune, valued at $35 million today, was disclosed when his will was made public. He has a rare Stradivarius violin from 1729 that was worth $46,000. Opposite the Playboy Mansion, his Beverly Hills estate sold for $3 million in 1985. For decades, the man whom everyone considered to be cheap had been covertly giving. He established $39 trust funds for each baby born in the city on October 5, 1961. The day his hometown renamed a junior high after him. He made discreet contributions to charitable funds, youth initiatives, and orchestras. His stinginess had been a facade. Without notifying anyone, the real Jack Benny gave. Comedy was eternally altered by him. Gary Shandling, Larry David, and Jerry Seinfeld all adopted his style. A show about nothing, a self-playing character, uncomfortable pauses, ensemble casts, and running jokes. Jack completed everything first. His program blended fiction and reality, broke the fourth wall, and demonstrated the subtlety, slowness, and cleverness of comedy. His 3 Walk of Fame stars, one for TV, one for radio, and one for film, reflect a 63-year career. Letters revealing something else also surfaced after his death. In private, he had backed civil rights initiatives. He supported Rochester, his devoted TV companion, and Eddie Anderson's family. Ebony magazine named Anderson one of the top 100 African Americans in 1962. The Rochester House, a shelter and rehabilitation facility, was established in Anderson's home after his death in 1977. Despite Hollywood's claims to the contrary, their 3 films from 1940 to 1941 demonstrated that black performers could attract sizable Southern audiences. And now, in 2025, an odd thing has occurred. The Radio Vault podcast series, Lost Episodes, is digitizing and making available Jack Benny's historic radio scripts. Jokes about the war that were too graphic at the time. He aired his episode again on January 7, 1945. People are still hearing his vault open for the first time today. He still has good timing. The jokes are still funny. And the more we learn, the more the guy behind the myth becomes apparent.